Hello and welcome to Anderson Community Television. I'm Carol Donahue, your host of a special program today called Meet the Author. Perhaps you belong to a book club. I've belonged to a book club for about 4 or 5 years now, and we've read so many interesting books. A few months back, the hostess decided she would choose an author who had written short stories. And since we had never read short stories before, we thought, what a great opportunity. But the big prize was the fact that the author is local and she's from this area, and I'm pleased to welcome her to our program today, and I welcome Kathy Coogan. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Carol.
Well, you were a hit at the book club, and I know you've been speaking like a Legendary Run book club, and
Yes.
And I think your books have been met with big approvals.
I've been awed and humbled by the reviews that my stories have gotten. I have done a lot of book clubs. I say done. I've discussed my stories at a lot of book clubs. 6 so far, one with almost 100 women. It's been probably the best exercise I could have as far as a writer goes, because when an author can hear feedback about what she's written, it's just the most exciting feeling in the world. It's great.
Well, maybe I can just take a moment and just hold your book up here so that it can be seen by our audience. Why don't you tell us the name?
Okay. The title of the collection is Baby's Breath, Stories of the Sad, the Sick, and the Evil, and How They Were Born. And the title came from the title story, which is Baby's Breath, which was an award winner in a international short story competition that was sponsored in Bantry, Ireland. And I happened to win an award for the story, so that's how I decided to choose that as my main title. Selecting the subtitle was a little more difficult, and I may have made a little bit of a mistake in my choice, because many people fear reading stories about evil. The only story that really contains evil in its true sense is the story Baby's Breath, which is based on the true life situation of Warren Jeffs, who was the cult leader out west who forced young women to marry members of his church. It was a polygamous, false church, I would say. And when I heard that story about Warren Jeffs and what he was doing to these young women, my question was, what do the girls think? So I wrote a story that is an offshoot of that, nothing truly about that, but it's a story about a young woman who is trapped in a situation like that. And it has gotten wonderful, wonderful comments. I'm very proud of it, and I was very proud to be given an honor for it.
Well, you touch on many different subjects, too. And
Yes.
some of them, rang true to me that I think, well, I've experienced that. And I mean, there is evil out in the world.
Yes.
No doubt. I mean, gossip, like I said before, gossip is evil.
Yes.
You are able to you're just this lovely lady, and you're reading this book and you think, is this biographical? No. Autobiographical? No. But you are able to use your imagination, step out of your skin. And I love this quote on the cover. My imagination is a separate part of me, not the needle of my moral compass. And I think that's a wonderful explanation as we delve into these stories.
Thank you. I think that it was important for me to tell people that these stories are fiction. They might be mindful of true situations that we all have in our lives. We all know of people who have struggled with various problems. These stories are about people who have alcoholism or who have anorexia or who have been abandoned or have been widowed. I hear those stories. I hear about friends who have gone through these situations, and I feel an empathy, but also my imagination kicks in, and I find myself writing about similar topics that have nothing to do with the individuals that I know, but it's a way to trigger a story in my imagination. So they're not autobiographical at all, but any of us who are honest know that we live in a real world with crisis. Mm-hmm. And I almost wish that I had subtitled the book Stories of People in Crisis, because that's a better description of what the stories are.
Well, you touch on so many different subjects. Like, I was really touched by the story about the elderly man that went back and forth to the convenient little shop and the lady was leaving, and about the young mother and the child. That was very touching.
Well, that was my first attempt to write a male character, a male protagonist. Almost all of my other stories, except one, have female protagonists. And that comes very natural to me. But I wanted to stretch myself a little bit. So I intentionally wrote this story about a kind of a down and out man who is struggling in his isolation. And I set it in the middle of a horrible cold spell, a winter storm in which he was truly trapped. That was one of the most difficult stories for me to write because I didn't know whether I was getting the male character right. But enough people have told me that they like the story that I feel pretty good about it.
Oh, yes. Now, to me, as my life has gotten, you think it would be less busy, but it seems like it's getting busier all the time. It is great to pick up a book like this. It's a short story, and the way you end each story, you have to use your imagination as to what happened, well, what came next, and that was a wonderful way of doing it. I just finished another novel, and the list of characters was 2 pages long, and I had to keep referring back, and if you put it down, to pick it back up, to start over, but this is just right.
Well, I think that's what, you've hit on what distinguishes a short story. A novel is a story about many people in many situations, can be across eras. A short story is a story which focuses on a specific incident in which a character or a very few characters have to make choices that move the story along. I've had many people who have told me that they liked a story so much they wish that it were longer. But I don't write novels. I write short stories. I have written a novel. It went in the garbage can. But I like the way that I can put all I've got into a short story rather than squandering a lot of words in a meaningless way just to make it longer. So I think I've found my niche. I think that short stories, it's a comfort level for me, but I also think that I'm proud that I can compel the reader to read about a situation that might be sad or sick or even evil, even funny. There are 3 stories in here that are amusing, but I like the capsule version, and I think that with the internet, I think more and more people are going toward reading short stories again. For a long time, short stories kind of lost popularity, but just recently there were 2 short story collections on the bestseller list.
I saw that.
Which is, my timing was wonderful.
Right.
It was Elizabeth Strout's Olive Kitteridge and George Saunders, who wrote The 10th of December. So I feel like I've struck it really close and really good as far as getting my timing as writing short stories.
Now, I read Olive Kitteridge. That was the same character as she progressed through her lifetime, and how she grew as a person and changed, how some people saw her one way, other people saw her another way. But yours are all totally different stories.
Yes, totally different, and they're triggered by different things, and that's what I have been told sets my collection apart. I wrote for every story an introduction to the story, explaining why I was writing the story. And I've always wondered as a reader my whole life, what makes a person sit down and write the story that they write? Because as I am now an author, I used to be a writer for businesses and nonprofits, but as I now am writing fiction, you do have to make a decision to sit down and write the story. You have an idea, but you still have to go through the work of writing the story. And I've always wondered, why would someone devote so much time and energy to that? So I decided to tell people. And in the introduction to Baby's Breath, I describe that it is the story of it's a fictional version of the Warren Jeffs story, asking the question, what do the girls think? And I think that opens the door to people to suspend disbelief and pay attention and absorb the stories as they really are. So I like that I did that. I'm proud of that little unique part of my book.
I did. I found that made it so much easier than to just go right into the story. Okay, now do you have a favorite?
Well, my favorite is truly Baby's Breath because it was the most difficult to write, and it's probably the most intense story that I've ever written. And the very first sentence of the story, which I won't read now, but people either take it or leave it. When you read the first sentence, you may just say, no, I don't want to read anything farther. But so it was, I had to take a leap of faith to write that story. I have a story that is, it's not exactly one of my favorites. I'm proud of it, but it's a story that was triggered in a moment of writer's block. And what I do when I have writer's block is I use word prompts. And that is simply compiling a list of words and attempting to use all of them in a particular essay, story, or whatever it is I'm writing at the time.
So if I would say to you, fire.
Yes, yes. I have a story about fire in here, as a matter of fact, but it's called After the Fire. But yes, my writers group and I, we will throw words into a pot and we will challenge one another to write a complete story using all of those words. They're completely unrelated. Now, I'll give you an example, if I might.
Please.
This story, the introduction is, to fix writer's block, I often play with weird, unconventional word combinations. Piano, butterfly. Nuh-uh, that won't work. Obstacle, pudding. No good. Giant, sombrero, nada. Girl, alligator, I started typing as fast as I could, and this is the story that I came up with, and I'll read just a few paragraphs. This is called The Girl and the Alligator. You crazy, gallivanting out there after midnight, a little girl like you, her dad had yelled when he caught her sneaking out. Mary Lee was insulted. 12 was hardly little. And in her year of nightly excursions since moving to Florida, Mary Lee had found that out there after midnight was the only good thing about living here. Mary Lee let her dad believe that she was gallivanting. Actually, she never went farther than the backyard. She was not stupid nor fearless. Her destination was the pergola, which reminded her of the terrarium that had sat on her mother's desk. Like the plant-filled globe, the pergola was a partially enclosed environment, separate from everything else in her neighborhood, coolish on the sultriest nights. From the pergola, she watched the ever-changing moon, sometimes looking upward, sometimes watching its reflection in the dark, still pond, which marked the boundary of her yard. She liked seeing the crescent moon fill up, a little each night, until it was full, or spill out again until it was a sliver again, something that she could count on. She hadn't seen the alligator at first. She was staring at the moon, mirrored in the pond, trying to measure how much it had filled since last night. Though she had been taught about its phases last year in 6th grade, Mary Lee preferred to imagine the moon as a round crystal bowl, bubble thin, invisible, until the luscious moon ingredients were poured into it. She loved that the moon bowl, full one night, magically emptied out, leaving just a skim of itself, as if some lucky kid had licked the bowl. Tonight, the bowl was half full of moon. Mary Lee had sensed the alligator before she saw him. Her scalp tingled and goosebumps rose, her skin confirming what her eyes saw. He had suggested himself to her as a shadow on the bank, then, like the Cheshire Cat appeared to Alice in Wonderland, the alligator's yellow eyes appeared to Mary Lee in Sarasota. As her night vision clarified, she saw him in full and realized her disadvantage. The alligator had seen her too. Mary Lou knew dogs, though she hadn't had one since last year in Cincinnati, so her first impulse was to avoid eye contact with the alligator. In one instinctual second, she wondered if alligators were like alpha dogs, but in her heart which pounded in her chest and ears, she knew it didn't matter. She sat staring at the alligator. The alligator lay staring at her. The corner pergola, lovely as it was, enclosed her on 3 sides, the soft, thorny foliage as encompassing as a barbed wire fence. The open side faced the short expanse of lawn down to the pond, where the alligator stared her down, his tired tread back, illuminated by the moon.
I remembered that one. That was one of my favorites. Very well done.
Thank you.
Now, Kathy, before you mentioned a writer's group, if someone out there watching would like to pick up their pen and maybe write a few ideas and thoughts down, what value do you give to this writer's group?
A writer's group is invaluable to a writer. Writers must be read. It's not enough that we sit down in the isolation of wherever it is we write and create a story. It's very important that it's received. I had a friend who said to me, if something that you write isn't read, you might as well not write it, because none of us writes solely for ourselves. I happen to belong to a writers group that is a group of people who all love to write. Some are published authors, some are business writers, some write essays for newspapers and magazines. Some are really ensconced in major, major projects. The thing that we do is we read portions of what we have written to our fellow writers, and then we are given feedback on what we have written. And that feedback in our particular group is a gentle suggestion of how to improve what it is that we have written. We don't have to take those suggestions. We may be perfectly happy with what we've written as it is. But I find that, especially reading something aloud to a group, there's a certain rhythm to writing when you read. And to hear myself read it to someone else and then have them react to it helps me measure the delivery of it, whether I'm selling the story, because when you write a story, you're not just giving facts, you're painting a picture. And reading to a writer's group, especially when it's a group of compassionate, understanding writers who are not out there to stab you in the back, or they're not jealous, or they're not envious. They're there to help you. That is the most beneficial thing that any writer can have. And our particular writing group is open to everyone. Anyone who has the smallest desire to write is welcome to come to our writers group, which is really interesting because we have newcomers all the time, and sometimes when they read, we say, oh my goodness, where did that person come from? Because the talent is so obvious.
How did you find this group?
Actually, I have a writer's website with 2 other women writers. And the website is meant to display our writing, but also I use it as a vehicle to explain freelance writing and what it takes to be a freelance writer. 2 of the women in the writers group, Mo Conlon, is the actual one who led me to this writers group that I go to. She attended this writers group and told me about it and said it's a wonderful group of people. And so I went to it for the first time, and I go almost every Monday morning. So
once a week you go. That's great.
Yes,
that is
once
great.
a week, yes.
And were there comments, like you said earlier, you don't have to take the comments, but did the critique, did that help you personally? Did you change things based on their critique?
Absolutely, absolutely. When you're writing is a very isolated and isolating occupation. And there's an expression in writing called kill the babies, which sounds just horrible. But that means that you are willing to excise from your writing your favorite sentence or your favorite discussion or a favorite paragraph if it doesn't truly move the story forward. My writers group was able to tell me, okay, you've said that already, or you've gone too far with this description, or okay already, that's enough. And I could listen to them and know that they were absolutely right, because I respect them and I trust them, because I know that they're there to improve my writing as well as they are there to improve their own writing.
Now, you mentioned earlier also that you were a technical writer.
Yes.
And you did that for how many years?
Well, I started as soon as I got my first personal computer. I realized that the internet was a great venue for a writer. I've always been a writer, but I was a writer with a small w. I realized that there were places that needed words to fill the gaps. The internet is a great place for people who are novices at being published to find sources to put their writing. I've written stories. I wrote a story about the supersizing of grocery stores that drives me crazy. I hate to go to the big grocery stores. And I wrote a rant about this, went online and found out that there is a magazine written for and compiled for independent grocers. So I sent them an email. I sent the editor of this newsletter an email and said, I've written this essay that is slightly critical of the supersizing of grocery stores, and he said, send it to me. I'd love to see if I can use it. He not only used it, but he sent me a check, which doesn't always happen.
Well, that was a nice
That was
perk.
a wonderful thing. So that's how I really got started writing essays and doing true freelance writing. I write for small businesses who, it's surprising how, what needs there are in small businesses when people are uncomfortable with the written word. I write for nonprofits when they need fundraising letters to be written, or when they have newsletters to report progress in a certain discovery of a cure. I write for people who do fundraisers for their specific charities. So that's what I do, as you say, in a technical way. But I have to say that the fiction has really grabbed my heart. It's something that I really, really have enjoyed doing.
Did you journal?
I've never journaled. I've never been a person that thought I was interesting enough to write down, this is what I did today, this is what I thought today.
It sounds like Facebook now.
Yes, yes. It's a little bit, I guess that's what we did before the social media. But I've never been a diary writer, and I've never been a journal writer. Probably another reason is I've got terrible handwriting, and I've never liked to look at my handwriting. So that was just not something that I was interested in doing.
So someone watching today is interested in starting. What would you recommend that they do?
Examine their conscience.
Good answer.
Because so many of us think that just because we can assemble a sentence or a paragraph, that it's worthy. And what we have to really do is to be honest with ourselves and say, first of all, am I writing on a topic that is of interest to anybody else? And secondly, I think that we all, as writers, tend to be a little bit verbose. And one of the good things about being a technical writer is you're given an assigned word count. And so you have to write within the framework of the amount of space that you're given. That was a great discipline for me. And that's something that I would tell someone who is starting out wanting to be a writer is really look at your writing as a reader would, because it's so often in our heads in its purest form. But when it's on the page, there can be something missing. I would also say, look for a first reader. My husband is my beloved first reader. I've slapped down essays and short stories at the breakfast table in typewritten form and tell me what you think of this, honey. And I've written some stories in which the husbands were the villains, and he has always said, go for it. You've done a great job. This is just what it needs to be. So look for a first reader. Look for someone that you trust. I have neighbors that I send my stories out to who read them and send them back to me either with little notations on the paper or with an email saying, I love this, I didn't like this worried me. So that's food for thought, and that's what every writer needs. We need to get out of our own heads because we spend way too much time in it as writers.
Well, Kathy, this has been so interesting. I'm so happy to have met you, and I have to say, You know, if someone picks up your book, Baby's Breath, that is the first story. And that kind of did give me a little start. I am so happy that I continued with it because it is not autobiographical, it is your imagination.
Yes.
And some wonderful things for us to think about. What's going on out in the world, what's happening to other people, not being in our own little cocoon.
Yes. Yes.
So
Thank you so much.
Do you have another book in the?
I actually do. I'm writing a collection of short stories in which the center of the story is a nursing home. And I'm writing about residents, employees, or visitors to that nursing home and the backstories to those things. So it's going to be kind of what they call a linked short story collection.
Well, I'm going to really watch for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for taking time out of your busy day to come and speak with us. And thank all of you for watching Anderson Community Television. I'm Carol Donahue saying, happy page turning. Goodbye.